golden bear. I broke your window into 1,000 shades of blue. My golden bear, can you feel the wind blow through the broken glass in your head? Sometimes dreamers fly and fall before awakening to reality, like feathers on the ground. Sometimes bears climb above the lower branches to hear the ravens of never coming down. My golden bear, I broke your window into 1,000 shades of blue. My golden bear, can you feel the wind blow through the broken glass in your head? Through the broken glass in your head.
Brian Vollmer and friends here on the Old Time Jam with Birchfield's Sally Ann. Before that, Richie and Rosie, Richie Stearns and Rosie Newton with Golden Bear. And that's Troublesome Creek String Band with Cousin Sally Brown. As we roll on through this first hour of the program, We've got lots more music right around the bend. Don't you go anywhere. Howdy folks, Brad Kolodner here on Radio Bristol, inviting you to tune in to the Old Time Jam, a weekly celebration of today's diverse old-time music landscape. From the traditionally rooted to the artists pushing the boundaries of
Summer's here.
releases from
Do you want to give it a few
contemporary
minutes for
old-time
latecomers, or do you
music
want to start promptly?
torchbearers.
How are you doing?
That's the Old Time Jam, Tuesday evenings from 6 to 8, right here on Radio Bristol.
Are we on? Oh, we're on. Hello. Welcome. Thank you for coming out to the Birthplace of Country Music Museum today. My name is Erica Barker. I'm the curatorial manager here at the museum. We are very excited about our speaker tonight, my former colleague and friend, Toni Doman Van Dyke. But before we get started, I would just like to say a few things, some housekeeping. I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Sam Parker, who's running tech for us tonight. Before I forget. Before we get started, I would like to go over just a couple of housekeeping things. The restrooms are down the hall out this door if you need to go to the bathroom tonight during the show. The front of the museum will be locked, so if you need to leave the museum for any reason, please use the Moore Street door out that side. Those doors will lock behind you, so if you're going to come back in after you go outside, make sure you've got someone ready to let you back in the door, or you're going to be stuck out there because there's not a handle on the outside of that door. We will have a question and answer time after the presentation, so if you have any questions, just hold on to those and we'll give you time to ask those. If you're joining us on YouTube tonight, you can put your questions into the comments. Sam will be monitoring that, and so we will do our best to ask as many of those questions as well as we can at the end. And then if you are enjoying the show tonight, if you enjoy this speaker series in general, we are a nonprofit. We do rely on donations, so if you would like to make a donation tonight to continue supporting future programming like this, please do so. There's a bucket out front. It'll be right outside the door after the presentation as well. And now I will introduce tonight's speaker. Toni Doman Van Dyke. Oh yes, please clap, yeah. Toni Doman Van Dyke is a 2023-2024 Fulbright Canada Student Award recipient. Her research project focuses on uncovering how globalization and technology have an impact and are interacting with the traditional music scene in Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia. She is currently the director of the Tazewell County Junior Appalachian Musicians Program Chapter, or JAM. Her previous work includes multiple roles at the Birthplace of Country Music, including curatorial specialist, grants coordinator, and producer and host of Mountain Song and Story on Radio Bristol. Toni holds a master's degree in communications and media arts and studies from Ohio University, focusing on Appalachian music and culture as the core of her graduate research, and is one of the few students to earn the world's first four-year degree in traditional bluegrass music offered at the Glenville State University in West Virginia. Toni is also a musician, currently performing in the country folk duo Virginia West, and she has recently embarked on a new journey baking homemade pies at her home-based pie shop, The Rolling Pin. Side note, I'm a huge fan of her pies. Highly recommend them if you haven't tried them yet. I've bought several.
Number one cut.
My household loves pie. Through all of her creative outlets, Toni aims to promote arts and culture and for a greater understanding of the Appalachian region. Please enjoy her talk tonight.
Woo. Thank you so much, Erica, for that incredible introduction. And thank you all so much for being here. I'm really excited to be here sharing information about my experience in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, Canada. So without further ado, I've got a lot to say. I feel like we could be here all night with me talking about this topic, so I'll get right into it. So for tonight's talk, I'm going to just give a brief introductory overview of my Fulbright project, which was called Complex Relationships, Contemporary Technologies and the Traditional Music of Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. And what that was a research project that was focused, like Erica just said, on documenting the current traditional music scene in Cape Breton and really looking at how contemporary technologies are playing an impact on that traditional music scene in that community. So when I talk about contemporary technologies, I'm really talking about anything that connects us. So, of course, we've had the internet for a couple decades now at this point, but how is the impact of globalization playing or really impacting tradition? So I'll get further on into that whenever I'm talking here this evening. But one of the driving factors of that thought, or just like the idea of technology and tradition intersecting, was looking at, okay, today we have access to everything at our fingertips when we're talking about music, right? So we no longer have to be in a community to learn the music or the culture of that community. So the internet and these technologies are able to transcend barriers of geography and connect us. And so with that connection, we're introduced to these endless, accessible music genres. You can really get into and learn anything out there. And so does that influence of having access to everything, does that play an impact on the traditions set for a culture? So I'll get on further deeper into that in the talk, but I also want to talk about the connections between Appalachia and Nova Scotia. So, and this will kind of all be convoluted into one big rambling. I feel like it's hard not to separate the two whenever I'm diving into this topic. And then I'll talk a little bit about the project updates and early findings. This is a really big project. I didn't mean for it to be, but I was originally I did interviews with plan to do interviews with 12 to 15 participants for my project. I ended up doing 33 interviews and multiple field recordings, so it ended up being a pretty big archival documentary project. And I have one interview left to analyze before I get into the next part of the project. So yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about that, and then towards the end of the talk, I'll share some video clips from my time, some field recordings that I did, and then Erica and I will do a few formal questions surrounding those video clips, and then we'll get into just some general questions. So, all right, so this is a map, Cape Breton Island. It's in Nova Scotia in the Canadian Maritimes. A little bit of background for myself and why I even knew about the Fulbright program and how I even came to putting this project together. So the Fulbright program is a cross-cultural exchange program through two countries, in this case the US and Canada. And they have these grant opportunities available in, I believe it's about 140 countries worldwide. And so what these grants do is they promote cross-cultural connection and exchange in any field of study. And so I have a background in bluegrass music and traditional music, and I work in the arts and culture sector, and I'm a lover of Appalachian culture and really feel like I really want to self-assign that title as being an ambassador for the Appalachian region because I'm from here and I really feel deeply connected to it. And so coming with that background of being in Appalachia, these grants, you're really supposed to connect where you come from, your cultural community, with where you're going. And so, yeah, so coming to the Fulbright, getting this award was like incredible because back in 2014, I was finishing up an undergraduate program at Glenville State College, which is in West Virginia. And like Erica just said, I did a bluegrass degree program. And I didn't have an opportunity to do any abroad programs in my undergrad. I was in bluegrass band, and we were usually traveling during the summer. But I found out about Professor Chris Cosner had mentioned this Fulbright program, and I thought, wow, that seems like something that I'd be interested in doing. And then fast forward a couple years later, I was in a graduate program at Ohio University, and I really started to get more serious about applying to this grant. So I had some really great conversations with staff over there, and how I came to develop this idea of a project was looking at my experience with bluegrass music and sort of looking backwards at the threads, where did bluegrass music come from? Because all music just doesn't get created and here's a brand new genre. Of course, we're in the birthplace of country music. There were things that happened that led up to any genre being created. So that it doesn't just pop up and exist out of nothing. You know, your music and innovation is influenced by the world around you. So people are innovating to make new genres. That's how new genres get created. So with bluegrass music and looking at developing this project, I was thinking, let me go backwards. What are the roots of bluegrass? And that was leading me to a lot of songs and ballads and tunes and, the convolutions of what makes bluegrass. You have roots from the British Isles. You've got Wales. You've got Ireland. You've got Scotland. You've got the transatlantic slave trade is in the whole story of what came about into string band music. So looking at all these threads and all these places and all these histories of these independent genres that came to create bluegrass, I thought, I want to learn more about that and maybe explore and see if I can find a connection to this music that I'm most familiar with at that time in about 2014, 2016, and see what I can find. And so it was through a lot of conversation that I was exploring those threads, and then another professor at Ohio University had mentioned French Acadian music, and they said, well, you don't really have to go outside of North America to find another thread. You know, maybe you can look at Canada. There's a large story about French settlement in Canada. Look into that because there's a connection with the Cajun music there. So it was sort of how I discovered Cape Breton was French adjacent. So there's a Celtic music scene in Cape Breton, if you want to call it that as a big umbrella term, I would say. But yeah, there's a Celtic music scene there that I just sort of found just through looking at some of these threads. And the history of Cape Breton Island, I found really has a history that parallels that of Appalachian history in the United States. So in Appalachia, of course, we all know there is a rich history of who came to this region, and that is complicated. There's people coming from all over the world for hundreds of years for a variety of economic reasons and political reasons. But you know, this nation is a nation of immigrants, and so is Appalachia. I mean, even in West Virginia, there's like Italian immigrants, there's Polish immigrants, there's people from England, there's people from everywhere. We're coming into the United States to settle when we look at the history of settlement for centuries. And so I thought, okay, well, whenever you look at Canada, I feel like as Americans, we forget about Canada. It is right there. It has a history that parallels the United States as well. Canada is a nation of immigrants. Canada had the same settlement patterns as we did. So you have a lot of people coming to North America over centuries. And so I found that, wow, there's a lot of people from Scotland coming over to Canada and settling in the Maritimes, the Canadian Maritimes, which if you look at this map here, Cape Breton is, of course, that little red island there. It's connected to mainland Nova Scotia. I think I can move my mouse around. Yeah, so that's mainland Nova Scotia in that area. This is Prince Edward Island. This is Newfoundland, and up way above it is Labrador. I think I have another map. Yeah, so there's where you can kind of see it on a bigger scale. But yeah, so there was there's a big influx of Scottish immigration coming to Cape Breton Island. And again, without getting into, I'm just going to give you the brief history of it. You can definitely research this a lot more and get into the deep understanding of immigration, but and the whole story there. But yeah, the Scottish Gaels were, for a variety of the same reasons people came to Appalachia. They were escaping religious prosecution, their rents were increasing, economic reasons brought them across to resettle in North America. So in particular in Cape Breton, Scottish people came over in whole communities. So oftentimes there would be people coming over on boats and they would settle in a community, and then maybe your neighbor would come over a year later. So even still today on Cape Breton Island, there's this rich ancestry of the Scottish Gaels. And with that, of course, people are bringing their music traditions, their language with them. And so for this music style in particular, looking at, I would call it Cape Breton fiddling or just Cape Breton style, it's sort of been described by scholars as being like frozen in time. I've always heard that whenever I was researching and putting this project together. And I kind of got to thinking, well, I wonder how true that is. I wonder if that really is true, because what I understand about traditions is, and I think it can be sort of a misconception when you're learning about it. Tradition sounds like it's supposed to stay the same. It's not supposed to change. But tradition literally just means being passed on. Doesn't mean it can't change. So tradition, I think there's some strong feelings surrounding changes to tradition. And I'm really looking for this entire project. I'm wondering if technology sort of speeds up some of those changes or impacts changes in other ways. And so going back to the history here, yeah, so Cape Breton Island, a history of Scottish immigration. I also have to mention that it's not the only cultural community or group that came to Cape Breton Island, or the Maritimes for that matter. The French had come there and settled for, again, a million different reasons. Settled, was forced to be there about 400 years ago, and the Scottish Gaels came about 250 years ago. And then, of course, the ancestral indigenous people have been there for over 13,000 years. Again, that mirrors the whole story of settlement and immigration of North America. So looking at that timeline, and looking at the comparison of Appalachia, kind of making these connections. Okay, you've got, so what I know about bluegrass, okay, you've got music that can go all the way back to England and Scotland. There's just one thread. Ooh, okay, you've got Scottish people also settling in Cape Breton, which is a very remote, geographically remote area. Oh my gosh, Appalachia is also geographically pretty isolated when you look at the history of just history. So the mountains, they're are very inaccessible up to a certain point in time. Let's say 400 years ago, whenever colonization started happening in North America, the Appalachian Mountains were really rugged. They were tough to get to. They were difficult to settle. And you've got this rich history of these self-sufficient mountaineering people that make up, you know, settling in this region. And so when you take a look at comparing that to Cape Breton Island in particular, it felt like it was very similar. It felt like it was kind of the same story. You've got a group of people coming over from a place. They're building a new life. They've got to be self-sufficient. They've got to figure it out. And that was my sort of geographic connection. The mountains are isolating geographically, and Cape Breton is a literal island. So I thought there's got to be something more here, you know, connecting that thread that's the same. It feels like it's a similar group of people. Feels like they wound up in two pretty different places that have a lot in common. And I wonder, yeah, that was the building blocks of this entire project. And looking at how technology kind of plays a bigger impact in this, I'm going to flip my slide. I think I got some photos. Oh, yes. So here's another quick visual before I get on into the specifics of the project. But yeah, this map on the left-hand side there is the Appalachian Mountain chain. And as you can see, it stretches all the way up into the Canadian Maritimes, because we just learned that this is Nova Scotia. Everybody in this room. Everybody tuning in from Canada is like, yeah, that's Nova Scotia. But so yeah, the mountains themselves are essentially the same mountain chain. And I felt it was so interesting to be there for such a long period of time. And another thing with these Fulbright grants is you're really removed from your own community, and you're placed in a new place. I mean, this is any kind of an abroad experience, but you're really immersed into that culture. And I feel just so completely welcomed in by the entire community in Cape Breton. I mean, it was really just open arms. We want to share with you. We want to learn about your community and music and culture. Like, please sing a song while we're here at a gathering. Like, it was such an enriching experience to be able to take part in this opportunity. But going back to connections again, yes, the mountains, they're literally the same mountain chain. And then if you want to get really, I don't want to say abstract because I think there's something to it, but if you go back to prehistory on the right-hand side of the screen, the Appalachian Mountains really were all one mountain chain at one point in time when you're looking at the world before it looks today in prehistory. So it's interesting to think that these mountains were once connected to these same places where these groups of people came from. Like, we'll look at Scotland in particular just for this conversation. But just to think that like all the mountains were sort of one, touching a little bit more at one point, and then they were literally ripped apart by the ocean, and now we still have these connections. I just think that there's something interesting there, maybe a little something, I don't know if you want to call it spiritual or wishy-washy, but I just think it's interesting to think about these spaces and these geographic areas still having that similar feeling with the scenery and with the mountains themselves. And there were so many times when I was driving around Cape Breton that I would just look and I would think, oh, I'm in West Virginia, or I'm in Southwest Virginia, and then you'd turn a corner and there would be the ocean. And it's like, okay, no, but it looks so very similar to the landscape down here in Southwest Virginia. And So to talk about the actual project itself, now that I've given you all just a little bit of a background, just a taste, I hope you go and learn more after this talk today. I hope that this just inspires you to learn more about music and other communities and cultures worldwide. But yeah, so my project was a independent research project. And in 2024, I spent 10 months, so the majority of the year, conducting in-depth interviews with musicians and cultural tradition bearers in the Cape Breton musical community. And specifically, I focused on traditional music and roots and culture, really surrounding that Scottish Gaelic tradition. And like I mentioned earlier, there are other cultural communities in Cape Breton. I actually find it very difficult to tell the one story of one group without mentioning the other group. Whenever you have people living in a similar area, of course they're going to interact, and I think some music styles are naturally going to interact. I mean, I think that's just natural. That's how innovation happens. That's how new genres are created, with that sharing of musical styles or elements or ornaments. So, but for this project specifically, I was focusing on the Scottish Gaelic side of things. And I interviewed 33 individuals. So that was a variety of musicians and tradition bearers. That was anyone from fiddle players, piano players. Often those were the same kind of people. They played fiddle and piano. That's the we'll get into the specifics a little later on the elements of the music tradition. But yeah, fiddle, piano players. I interviewed quite a few Gaelic speakers. So I've been talking a lot briefly about the Scottish Gaels, the ancestry that came over into Cape Breton, but they brought their language with them, and the Scottish Gaelic language is still spoken today in Nova Scotia. It's gone through a lot of decline. In fact, I believe it was in just one generation from around the mid-30s. Just like one generation, you can look at these. I wish I had it with me. I should have put it in the slideshow. You can look at some data that basically shows, here's the percentage of native Gaelic speakers, and the government banned speaking Gaelic. They wanted everyone to speak English at one point in time. So there's one generation where people were forced to start speaking English, so that whole language was wiped from the community. And there's all these reclamation efforts really to reclaim the language. A lot of people have a history connected to it. They have family members who remember speaking Gaelic as being very young and then were forced to stop speaking it, or maybe a grandmother spoke it. And so the music traditions are tied into that Gaelic language. And I think something that was really enlightening for me was realizing that having a cultural community who, of course, I mean, this is not my cultural community. I only speak English, and I can barely do that sometimes, But having a cultural community that only speaks one language, if you're translating things into English, things are going to get lost. So there's elements of the Gaelic language and the cultural traditions that aren't even going to come through or to be understood whenever you translate them into English. You can talk about this with any culture, but oftentimes you'd be in spaces in Cape Breton and people would be speaking Gaelic to one another, and you could tell somebody's telling a story. There's a rich storytelling tradition up in Cape Breton Island, and everybody would laugh, and you would be like, okay, they'd fill you in because they're trying to be nice. They're like, okay, well, they said this, but it just doesn't come across the same way in English, so it's really not funny. You just got to get it in English. So, and all that to say is there's a whole well of cultural knowledge that once a language is lost, it's lost. Like, that culture's lost. So you can't even begin to understand it if you don't speak the language. So with the decline of so many native Gaelic speakers in this community, this is a big issue in this community. They actually have the Nova Scotian government, the province, has a Office of Gaelic Affairs, so there's a lot of cultural programs and efforts to teach the language, and people are very welcome. They want you to, oftentimes you feel very welcome to learn the language. There's a lot of learning opportunities right now. So I just wanted to mention that. Again, I'm kind of just talking all about my entire experience, so back to the actual research here, but so I interviewed many individuals for this project throughout the year. I did several field recordings and field recordings at different events and gatherings. So this tradition has a lot of square dancing, a lot of fiddle music. There's many house parties. There's a lot of cultural events going on. So I have milling frolics. I was talking earlier with Jerry and Deborah over there about milling frolics, which are basically, it comes from a Scottish tradition, and I have a clip of it here that I'll play later this evening. People, whenever they're weaving cloth, you've got to shrink that cloth and make it usable. And so there's a tradition in Scotland, it's called walking. And people would have these songs where they would have walking songs where people are doing work, right? So there's doing work songs. It's a repetitive thing that's happening for hours and hours. And so in Cape Breton, they're called milling songs, and those are Gaelic song traditions. And they're sung at these milling frolics. And, we're not making our own clothes anymore. We're not milling and weaving or spinning and then weaving our own clothing into fabric anymore. So these traditions are, you could say they're obsolete, but they're still done because it's a tradition and it's a space for community to get together and to participate and for this language to be spoken. So anyway, back to the research. I can't get off this slide. So, so the outcome of my project here is going to be a series of research-based audio stories, podcasts, and they're going to be featuring the stories and media that I collected during my time in Canada, and stitched together in a way that is compelling, and based on a theme. So I always go back to this example, but if anyone's ever heard of the Radio Lab podcast, it's like one of the best podcasts ever. I love it. It's so well done. They have so many voices and different music and sound bites overlaid together. So you're listening and you're really immersed and you're hearing different voices and you're learning so much. So that's my inspiration for this project. I'm also working on a companion documentary for the entire thing. So you'll have some visual elements as well. And I do have to also say that this was originally planned to be an audio project. And I decided to bring a video camera. I'm also affiliated, I do have to say, with Cape Breton University. That was my affiliate and my resource while I was in Canada. So Cape Breton University, I'm going to be donating the interviews that I collected into their archive, which has a well of information about musicians and just information on all things cultural in Cape Breton. So all those interviews will stay in that community and really, hopefully be accessed for someone in the future to look back at this time, look back at 2024 and see how musicians are engaging with contemporary technologies. The questions that I was asking them was all about, how are you using technology? How are you learning with it? Do you feel, because you have access to everything now, and maybe you like AC/DC, does that affect the way you play the fiddle? You can access K-pop from Korea. Does that impact how you play music in this tradition? Because we've never really been at a time where we've been able to access so much. And my big question with this project was thinking, okay, if we have all these outside influences at our fingertips, are we all sort of just going to start sounding the same? Or what's going to happen? Are traditions, there's always sort of this threat that traditions are going to disappear if no one's participating in them. I have a background in bluegrass music in particular, and I would sort of always hear this narrative, and I'm always kind of looking around thinking, well, I think there's like natural ebbs and flows of cultural interest. So I think it's valid to feel that way, but I also think it's natural for things to change. So that's kind of I'm also coming from, in bluegrass in particular is interesting, and just being in that world for so long, I really found that, and this is, again, coming from a really, really valid perspective, is that bluegrass has sort of a set of rules, and I think you could make the case for any genre. We'll just talk about bluegrass. Bluegrass has the set of rules, and so it's got a format, right? You've got fiddle, banjo, bass, upright bass, you've got a guitar in there, maybe you've got two guitars. Okay, so when you start to use electricity amplification, ooh, okay, that's making me nervous as a traditionalist. I don't like that. Ooh, if you bring any other instrumentation inside the genre of bluegrass, like a flute, is that bluegrass anymore? Because some people are going to have some strong opinions on that. And some people are going to say, hey, that sounds awesome. I'm really interested in that. So that was also the driving factor, or just the interest point with this project, is I wondered, I wonder if another cultural community, like a traditional music community, like in Cape Breton, the fiddle music scene, I wonder if they feel like that. I wonder if they're really like strong, like fierce protectors of the boundaries of what makes up this tradition. So that was another sort of comparison. And so in all my interviews, I would ask people that question. I'm like, what's the boundaries? What's the cutoff point to this music? And, do you mind if people take it and innovate it? And it's funny because I was really expecting, when you do any kind of project, like you kind of expect people to say a certain thing, but I always found that everyone was just they were so aware that it was a living tradition, and living traditions change. But we're really respecting, and it's really important to Cape Breton musicians to respect the foundation of the music. So if you're coming from it and you're learning it from a place of respect, then yeah, it's okay to maybe do some of those things if you know when and where to do it, because the audience is a big reason. If you're at a space where they're expecting traditional music, maybe don't bring out a flute. So it's just very interesting. Oh no, we're going. What is happening, Sam? What is happening? Okay, we fixed it. Thanks, Sam. But yeah, so yeah, that's a lot of information. But yeah, it's a very interesting topic, and let's see. Oh, some other questions that I asked some musicians. So we'll talk about that for a second. So yeah, this project really sought out to document the current music scene and look how musicians are engaging with these technologies. Look how record how they feel about it. One interesting thing that I felt I was hearing from a lot of musicians was the use of video recording. And so I just mentioned that this had originally been planned to be an audio stories project, and it very much was, but I thought, well, if I'm going to record an interview with so-and-so, I might as well have a camera in case I want to do anything else with it eventually. So I brought a camera with me, and it's like, oh my gosh, audio is so like not invasive. You can turn this on, you can hide it, you can have a conversation. But when you put a camera in someone's face, like that changes things. So when you put a camera in front of someone's face when they're performing, and now we all have our cameras, we all have our phones in our pocket at any given time, that starts to change like how I'm feeling as a musician. So, also asking musicians and interviewees, how do you feel about the effects of the impact of tourism, because there's a lot of people coming and to this place and to Cape Breton Island to experience the music scene, and there's a huge culture of tourism, and of course people welcome tourists and visitors, and they're coming to learn about this community and culture. But I don't think you can go anywhere now without seeing any music and having someone take a video clip of it. And it's sort of like, oh, I've been here. Am I really being in the moment, or am I just capturing this thing to stick in my pocket or post on Instagram or post on wherever to show that I'd been there? And again, I think it's like sort of like you can look at it two ways. You can look at it as, well, the musician is sitting there and this is a public place and I'm so excited they have bagpipes. Like I don't see bagpipes every day. I don't hear bagpipes. This is amazing. I want to take a video of it. There were times where there was one pub that was close to where I was staying, just down the hill, and they would have sessions there. And when the bagpipes came out, it was like a sea of phones. It was like, whoa, we gotta get this. This has never been documented before. And so you kind of sit back and you take notice of, okay, everybody has their phones out, okay, but why is that? So how does the musician feel about that? Because if it's an audio recording, it's probably not going to be as invasive as that video element. So there is a lot of conflicting feelings from the musician's standpoint about, hey, I know that I'm benefiting from this. I know that this is a video and it's going to be posted and maybe I'll get a gig from it. Maybe I am benefiting from it. But where's the line? Because maybe I'm less likely as a musician to take a risk playing a new tune that I've learned before, because what if I mess up? There's a camera in front of my face, or maybe I'm just having a really off day and I don't really want there to be a camera of this. Maybe this is a new song song, you know. So there's so many things that like technology can make people feel different. They can make like, so is that use of just bringing a video out, is that impacting the tradition? Because I would say, yeah, it definitely is, because people are, maybe they're not learning as many tunes because they're going to stick to the ones they do know instead of taking that risk. I had another thought on that, and it is gone because I'm just going, which I knew I would do. But, oh gosh, there was another thing. Okay, recording, events. Oh, cassette tape stories. So another big thing about this community and this culture was the sharing of music. And so I asked everyone in my interviews. I had a predetermined set of interview questions that I sort of tailored to each person. But I had these interviews sort of structured where I was asking them about their background, their use of technology, and their feelings surrounding that, and what the future of the music scene was. So you're really getting like, here's my learning journey, here's how I'm using it, here's the changes I've seen, and so it's pretty. There's a lot of themes that can emerge from this. But when we talk about learning music, something that I thought was just so interesting for all the Cape Bretoners was their use of cassette tapes for learning. So there are so many stories from so many people of all ages. So I don't think I mentioned it. I think it's on the next slide. Yeah, so the interview subjects were a wide range of ages, gender, different backgrounds located all across the island. And yeah, one thing I asked them was, everyone had a story about like a cassette tape. And so people would, in the past, they would bring these like reel-to-reel recorders, and they might record a house party. And then that cassette tape is being copied and passed around in the community. So everybody's learning those tunes, whether it's like Maboo Hall Christmas 1983, and that tune, oh, that's a really good tape. Do you have it? It has the best tunes on it. Oh, I've got to get a copy. Who do you know that has a copy? Okay, I got to get that from so-and-so. And so these tapes got passed around in the community, and there would be some families and some people who would just record like tape after tape after tape. There was one person I talked to who said her parents just had just like boxes and boxes of these tapes. It was just endless, and you could just, you pick them up and you listen to them, and that's how people were sharing and learning music, and they still are. These people are in their 30s and 40s mostly who were sharing these cassette tapes, but that's like I'm interviewing all different ages too, and it's not just cassette tapes, because that's another interesting thing about technology, is it changes so quickly. I mean, we're on the cusp of AI. I had no idea that I would even be asking questions about AI whenever I started drafting my interview questions. But you look at the whole evolution and changing media formats. If I'm talking to someone who's in their 80s in this community, they definitely had radio, and they had other influences coming in via the radio, but they were probably learning through that family transmission. So a family is learning or passing down those musical traditions, versus someone fast forward today who's 16 years old and they've got Spotify. So they can get an album on their phone, they can go to YouTube and use the slow downing app. So you're learning the same kind of things, the same sounds. Maybe you're not. Maybe you don't know someone who has a cassette tape, Maboo 1983 or whatever the tape is. So it's just the changing formats of technology is interesting too. But yeah, these are some of the research questions that I proposed when talking to these people, interviewees in Cape Breton. Interviewees. But I think I've pretty much covered that. But some early findings. I am still in the just wrapping up the analysis phase of this project, and so this is going to be a lot more in-depth. That's the next step. But like I just mentioned, some of the common themes that came out of these interviews were learning with technology, the importance of cultural participation, the impact of tourism, boundaries to tradition. I already mentioned that most, I think everyone, I haven't tallied it all up yet with all my data of the qualitative interviews that I've been doing, the qualitative analysis, but most everyone, I think it's safe to say everyone made the point that culture is a living tradition and it's going to change. And that's another thing that's I think is very interesting, because like I mentioned earlier, people have this fear, at least in my experience with bluegrass music and other traditions around the Appalachian region. Okay, well, what if they change too much and they're not recognizable? Our hope, at least for the Cape Bretoners, is that, okay, this music holds some kind of integrity into the future, that it is recognizable, but maybe the instrumentation will change. So in the Cape Breton, I guess I'll just talk about that now instead of, it was one of my questions with Erica, but I'll mention it now. But the format to the Cape Breton sound and the musical traditions is, like I said earlier, very heavily based on Gaelic song traditions. So there was a point in time where Gaelic songs it's just poetry. There's like Gaelic poets, and those just became songs, the things that they were singing about, and those traditions got pulled over from Scotland into Cape Breton, and the song traditions, those melodies, became tunes in a lot of the times, and a lot of the repertoire in this community is heavily pulled from Scotland. It's also, there are some Irish tunes in there as well. So it's still changing, like new things are being brought in. So at one point in time, it was just really referred to as Scottish fiddle music. And in the I believe it's around the 1920s, jazz was happening. We all know about jazz. And so jazz was kicking off. And Canada, I think it was Nova Scotia, had one of the biggest piano manufacturing places in I don't know if it's the world or Canada. I don't want to say it wrong, but Cape Breton or Nova Scotia was making a lot of pianos. So pianos were readily available. A lot of people had them in their homes. And this tradition evolved from having just being fiddle music unaccompanied to having piano being the accompaniment. And so now, much like in old time, where it's a banjo and a fiddle being accompanied or playing off of each other, we hear that all the time here in this region. Piano and fiddle is the two things that you will hear everywhere. That's really one of the main formats of the music style. And of course there's piping traditions, there's Gaelic singing, and we'll get to milling songs. We'll see a little clip of that as well. But yeah, and so another thing about this community too, I just wanted to this is more observation than it is early findings, but this is a really community oriented musical community. And I really it is a small place, and I don't want to give the impression that Cape Breton is only fiddle players. Of course, there's other music going on there. There's other things going on. There's other people. But the cultural community that really participates in the fiddling tradition and the music scene, the traditional music scene, is really vibrant. There are, I arrived in Canada in January of 2024. New Year's Eve. So our first full day was January 1. And KT and we got there. It was December 31st. So we pull in New Year's Eve. We've been on the road. We'd been on the road for 5 days, and we're tired. We're I don't know anybody in this place. It's all frozen. And we meet somebody, and she says, "Oh, hi, you guys are new. Do you want to come meet my friend? He's a Gaelic speaker." And my partner and I, KT, we're like, "Oh, okay, sure, yeah, let's go. Why not? We'll go. We'll just be over for a little bit." And I didn't realize New Year's Eve is big. It's a big day for Gaelic culture. It's one of the biggest celebrated holidays. So we were out till, 2 or 3 a.m. We went to 3 houses, met the whole town. I mean, it was amazing. And it's you go to one house and then everybody goes to the next house. And then before you know it, you're driving up a mountain behind a sedan in a snowstorm, and you think you're going to fall off into the ocean. And then you're hearing fiddle tunes, and you're like, wow, what a place. So that was our introduction to arriving. But arriving there in the middle of winter, I wasn't really sure what to expect. I knew that the community was pretty active during the summer, which is why I scheduled my grant period, to be primarily in the summertime. But I really found that there was so much happening. There were so many get-togethers and casual get-togethers and community get-togethers happening even in the middle of winter. And that was really eye-opening and enlightening to me, because people really want connection. And this is a really connected community. And I think it's a great example for all of us to understand and to be inspired by this, because this is what we're all missing. I think technology is great. Don't get me wrong, but it's not that great. It's not always always great. I mean, how many times have you been on a Zoom meeting and you've been in your house? And I had a remote job for a while. I've worked where I've been behind a screen primarily, and it's just me and a computer. And yeah, you've got your meetings, but that can be very isolating. I know we all went through this during the pandemic, but just the isolation that we're all experiencing in our day-to-day lives is something that we need to be talking about more. We should be engaging in our communities more than what we are. Like, I mean, I know this from firsthand experience, how isolating it can be to just be in your house and then go to bed and then wake up and open your laptop. I mean, yeah, we all have to work, but this community is really connected. There are so many really welcoming spaces where people are participating and really want to get together and to uplift that communal spirit. So I think that's something that maybe we can all take away. I know it's something that I've taken away, and I really want to be more community oriented as well. And I don't just saying community oriented doesn't need to be just a line on a grant application. I really think we need to be implementing these things, and we need to be supporting and encouraging each other in our communities where we're living, because that's what makes them great. So that's the reason why people want to visit these places. So you can build a promotional speaker, inspirational speaker moment. So inspirational speaker, get out into your community and participate, because that's what makes it great, and that's what makes these spaces great to live in. And you know, I had an incredible time in Cape Breton with the community. Okay, we'll get on to the early findings so we can move on. So, yeah, I think we pretty much covered most of that. So now, I'm going to play a clip. Sam's going to get a clip here ready for us to watch. And this is going to be... this is a pretty rough clip. I have not gotten into the editing portion of my project yet, so these are just raw clips. The sound is not that great, but just for tonight's talk, I wanted to... I think this is the right one. Yeah, I wanted to show you some clips from the music community. So we'll start with music on this clip, and then Erica and I will have a couple questions. We'll talk about it, and then we'll see a dance clip. So you're going to see different music styles. You're going to see the instrumentation. You're going to hear some Gaelic song. You're going to hear some accompaniment. So let's give it a listen.
I'm not on. Oh, now I am. Hey. That was a wonderful video clip. I loved seeing the music. So you've mentioned a few times, Toni, that the cultural community and traditional music in Cape Breton is very connected to the community. Could you tell us a little bit more about the community and the elements that are part of that traditional culture and describe the musical style that we just saw?
Yeah, so as you just saw, there was a lot of different things in there. So, of course, the last video that you saw was of a session. So you saw a whole bunch of musicians gathered around, and they're all, most of them were playing fiddle. There were some pipes in there. You saw some dancers getting up. And so, yeah, that was a jam session, so that's open to anyone. There's lots of jam sessions all over Cape Breton Island that people can participate in. And so earlier I was also talking about some changes to the music scene, and I know a lot of people in my interviews had mentioned that, well, in the past there weren't that many jam sessions. Really, it was people getting together in people's homes and playing music for entertainment, much like people got together on front porches here in Appalachia to play music for entertainment. So there's another thread there, another connector. And a change that some people have observed is that people are all playing the tune together now. And in the past, you had more of one fiddler playing a tune, and it was sort of like featured more. And that was like an opportunity to listen to this person play. And then today it's a little bit different. You have more of this like openness where everybody can join in, and it's very welcoming. I don't know if you caught it, but there was a part in that that last clip of the person dancing. So this is a really interesting thing about this musical tradition that just like really blows my mind, and I still can't quite believe it sometimes when I'm hearing it. But none of the tunes are rehearsed. It's all improvised, but all the tunes are sort of known, but many of them rather. So there are types of tunes. There's strass bass, there's jigs, there's reels, there's formats where all of these tunes are structured in a certain way for certain times. The music is inextricably linked to dance. Like you cannot. Another change that people mentioned was, well, maybe the music's getting faster and it needs to stay at this certain tempo. Well, it actually can't get too fast because it has to be danceable. Like dance and music is totally linked. So if it's too fast, you can't dance to it. So that's an interesting thing. But the thing I was mentioning in that clip was there was a moment where the last tune ended and someone had like kicked off into the next tune, and then everybody joined in because they all knew it. And so that's pretty common. So it's pretty common for the brains and the brain power it takes to just know these tunes is really incredible for Cape Breton musicians, that are especially the fiddlers and the piano. This is all improvised, so the piano accompanist is following the fiddle player, and there's tunes that are structured so people know them. They maybe know that this tune's coming after this tune, or this one works well together, or this was on a recording, or whatever. But it's pretty common for a fiddle player to go through 200 to 300 tunes at a square dance in a night, which is kind of crazy to think about coming from where we live here. I mean, this is Bristol, Virginia, but that really blew my mind. And most people know hundreds, thousands of tunes. And you also have to kind of understand that family transmission of how people are learning. So a lot of people, it's just been so around them. They've been immersed in this musical tradition their entire life. So they know these tunes, even if they maybe didn't play that one in a while, it might just come out. It's this like memory, and they do sound similar. I mean, but they're different tunes. So, and the tunes are played through twice, and then they're moved on. So there's also these great stories. I've heard these stories and collected some of these while I was doing interviews. But people talking about, people used to, before we were able to record, before we had technology that was able to do that so we can learn quicker. I mean, it's really amazing how much access we have to learning tools today. But in the past, people would go to a dance. There were stories about people going to a square dance, and they would hear a tune, and they'd like hear the first part, and then they'd like play it to themselves all the way home so they could learn it. Or there's other stories about people listening to the radio with maybe a sibling, and it's like, you get the A part, I'll get the B part, because they're only going to play it through twice, and then it's gone, and then they're on to the next tune. So that's really interesting in this musical, this community and this like music structure. And I also just like gotta mention too that I don't want to come across by any means as the expert here. You know, I was doing one project for a limited amount of time. I felt very welcomed into this community and really thankful to be able to do that. And I really just like want to say thank you to all the Cape Bretoners and for allowing me to share some of your story. I mean, that last clip of this scene in this session, you know, we did a special recording project at a local museum to do that. So any musicians that were comfortable being recorded, I did go through a research ethics process with the university, Cape Breton University. I know how invasive it can be to record someone. I mean, I did a whole project where people were constantly telling me, the camera's in my face, it's uncomfortable when I'm in public, and I'm recording them, and I'm bringing a camera into these spaces. So, it's really, really wonderful that they were so welcoming that I was able to do this in the first place. So it's hard to tell. It's hard to talk about technology when you're using it and you're putting a camera in someone's face.
Yeah, I don't want to jump off of your questions, but I actually wrote down a question related to that that I was going to ask you at the end, if you don't mind me interrupting our planned questions for this one. So one thing that jumped out at me during your talk was the reaction of musicians when they have the camera pointed at them that might make them play differently or play something differently. But then, of course, your whole project is an intentional oral history to capture that. So that's using technology, sort of the flip side of that. Do you think the good outweighs the bad? I hadn't ever thought about, you know, are there intentional oral histories like this where we can capture these kinds of things that we want to preserve that tradition, or are we changing the tradition by putting cameras in people's faces too often?
Oh man, you just like answered it. Yeah, I think it's like I think it's complicated. I think it can be good and bad. I think it's great for preservation. I mean, I've had a lot of people during my time in Cape Breton mention that there's a rich history of folklorists coming to the area to record the music and the traditions of that region. Helen Creighton was a female folklorist who came to Cape Breton in the middle of the 21st century and she literally went around with this like recorder in her her heels, and she would like go into these people's houses and she would record someone singing a song or having at a milling, that with the milling as the cloth on the table there, and she has like her own collection, and she didn't speak Gaelic, so you know there's a what's lost in that because she's English speaking and she doesn't know what people are saying, so there's a history of people coming into the area and documenting, and that really adds to the collective materials that are available to the community. So in my experience, I felt very welcomed and able to do that because, you know, when I think about this, I didn't ask anybody to come up there. I wrote a grant, and someone on a grant committee said, yes, you can do that. And I didn't ask anyone before I got there. So I had a contact there that I worked with, Chris McDonald at Cape Breton University, who was like very kind and helped me put this project, didn't help me put it together, but I mean, he was a contact there and said, yes, I think this would be applicable to do that. But technology, it's good and bad.
Yeah. It's like we can capture everything in a way we'd never have before, but are we changing it while doing that? And now I can't stop thinking about it. So thank you.
And that's what that's what I hope to uncover at the ending part of the project, is a little bit answer more of those questions. So I think there is no answer. I think it's like how it's used.
Yeah, it sounds like I'm just going to have to listen to the podcast.
Nice drop, yeah.
So you've also talked about how this community is very tied to the Gaelic language, and being that the Gaels came to Nova Scotia from Scotland and brought their language and music traditions with them. So while you were there, did you have an opportunity to learn any of the language?
Yeah, I did, and it was really exciting again to be welcomed in to that space. I'm there as an observer, and if I'm invited to participate in something, that's great. You know, that's how you learn, and that's how you get a deep respect for a culture, which I definitely have now. I love the whole community and cultural community. But yeah, you know, I had the opportunity to take a what was it? It was a there were some community language classes, and through where the area that I was staying at Bain Vabu in Mabu, North Carolina, Nova Scotia, Mabu, Nova Scotia, Cape Breton. They had a really wonderful, and they still have it. It's called a Gaelic Foundations, I believe, program for undergraduate students. And so I stayed in, during my time there, I stayed in a former, it's a decommissioned convent, and as my housing. And this community had gotten this building. It was a convent. They converted it into some like housing, and some they had an undergraduate foundational program to learn about Gaelic culture. And so they had university students, a whole group of them, like living in this building, and they were learning these traditional culture. So they actually had university classes going on in the building that I was at. So I could sit in on some classes. I found it to be very challenging. I just have a basic introduction to it. I actually feel like anyone can learn a language I don't think you think, oh, I missed it in Spanish class, like I'll never learn Spanish. I think adults have a mental block when it comes to learning, and you can learn a language. There are plenty of speakers in Cape Breton. That's a great example of learning the Gaelic language. I also was able to take a week-long immersion class, which I really was just had the opportunity to do it, and thought, wow, this is not something I've ever done before. I don't know any other languages except English. And I took an immersion class, which was a totally eye-opening experience. You are basically placed in a space where everyone is speaking foreign language around you, and you're like, okay, what? And you're making tea, right? You're in the kitchen. Some of these immersion classes might be at a home, so you're making cookies, you're making tea, and someone is holding up, a teapot, and they're saying something, and they're holding it, and you're like, I know, okay, oh, that word means teapot. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I would love to continue a language learning journey just out of respect and just interest in the culture. But I encourage anyone to learn a new language. I think it's great for your brain, and you should download Duolingo. And it's really great.
That owl won't leave me alone.
Yeah, they will bother you. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds like an awesome experience to try to. That's got to be the best way to learn a language, is full immersion like that. So that's really cool that you had that opportunity. Yeah. Did you want to play another video?
Oh, right. Yeah, we have another clip. Sorry, I don't mean to take too long. We have one more clip, and then just another question, I think, and then we can open it up to chat. So yeah, there's the dance clip. Sam's got it.
Take it away, Sam. Is there sound on this one? Tony's going to sing this one. Can you hear me now? Hey. So the first thing that jumps out to me in those videos, we just hosted a square dance here at the museum a couple weeks ago with Tyler Hughes as our caller. He's our favorite caller. He's awesome. But I noticed that there are not any callers in any of the video clips from that video. So is that normal? Could you expand a little bit on the square dance style of
Yes, okay, so the square dancing is my absolute favorite part of being up there. This is why I want to go back. Like, it's so fun. So there's a rich, of course, square dancing history here in Appalachia. And yeah, so most of the time when you go to a square dance here, you've got a caller, and there's so many endless sets or figures is what I would call them. So like Tyler Hughes at the square dance here at the museum 2 weeks ago would say, okay, we're gonna do Bow to the Oyster or Birdie in a Cage, or these square dances that everybody knows, or it's pretty common for a caller to be like, okay, let's walk through it, right? And so you walk through it once, and then you do the set. And so in Cape Breton, there used to be callers, is what I'm told, and I don't know, again, the full history, but there's so much common knowledge with the dances that people just know how to do them. So like that, some of the square dancing, that we saw in this clip was all the Inverness County sets. So it's like a regional square dance style. I didn't talk about this earlier either, but there were regional fiddle styles as well across the island that sort of, as roadways got more connected, it's more of one style now, because if you were in a community and it was kind of difficult to get up the road, even 10 miles, like the fiddle style is going to be maybe a little different. So there's a history of these regional fiddle styles all across the island, and it is more, I would say, more one sound now, but there are still regional styles. So it's the same thing with square dancing. There's like the Inverness County set, or maybe if you go up to the French community, the French-speaking community, like around Chetty Camp, Nova Scotia. So I don't have the map in front of me, but where I was staying was very, very Gaelic heavy, and with people and settlement and family history. And then just an hour up the road, straight up into the Cape Breton Highlands, which is a national park, there'd be like a whole French-speaking community, and you go in the grocery store and everything is French, and they have a micro-M center, and that's like they have a French style that they're doing, and their square dances there. So you're in a square set is what they call them. They call them square sets. It's like, it's a square dance, but they call them square sets. And you're hearing French calls, and there is a caller. And so it changes, but most of these dances are, people just know the figures. And it's not just in Cape Breton, it's all of Nova Scotia. There's dances and things. And you probably also notice like people dancing a lot in between. And they're like holding hands, and so you're step dancing in between. And there's, I guess the structure would be, for example, the Inverness County set has 3 figures. So when we're dancing with Tyler, Bow to the Oyster is one figure. We all do it, and then we're done, and we get off and we go take a break. Well, if you go up with your partner for the Inverness County set, you're on the floor for 3 figures. So like three different dances. That's all the same. It's all tied together. You do the first figure, that's to a jig step. You do the second figure, that's a little different. There's another layer that you do, like you spin your partner a certain way, you would be promenade around the hall. And then the fourth figure is what we saw whenever people are like splitting and they're like step dancing, and it looks like chaos when you're watching it, but it's not. It's like very organized and has a process. So just like, and square dance histories are also so interesting. Like I was up there and I thought, wow, I should have did a whole project on square dance, because this is so exciting and so fun to participate in. Oh, and the square dances mostly happen in the evening. Like it was not uncommon for square dance. Well, it was common. I mean, square dances started at 9:30 at night, and they went till 12:30, 1 a.m., and they were packed. I mean, they're packed dance halls.
They look very popular, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, in the past, people have said that you could go to square dances 5 nights a week in the summer. Today, there are some halls that are struggling, so they don't have dances every night. And I found it to be, I went to at least 3 to 4 dances a week all summer at different dance halls. But even hearing people talk about, well, yeah, this is great, but there used to be more. And then that makes you wonder, well, okay, is the tradition at risk of like some decline with people, young people not being in the area or moving away for opportunities? That's what we hear in Appalachia all the time too. So I think there's like natural ebbs and flows of cultural interest.
I think that's a complaint every town has about their young people.
Yeah.
So we've both mentioned a few times now that the culmination of this project is going to be a podcast. So can you tell us a little bit more about the podcast project and how many episodes that's going to be? When is it going to be released? And what are the episodes going to cover?
Yeah, so I'm currently, I mentioned earlier just briefly about the podcast project, but yeah, the end result of this whole thing will be a series of, I hope, 6 to 8 episodes of different themes that have emerged from my interview conversations. So those themes could be, learning with technology, using technology. One could just be dance traditions. One could really focus on the impact of Gaelic language and how that's tied to the song traditions. One could be fiddle. I'm fiddle traditions and songs and tune types. So I'm really looking at this to break it down into pretty broad themes, and that's what I'm working on now. That's my next step, is breaking down the steps. But I'm planning to have it all released by summer of this year, so plan to be July. That's my timeline. And after I release the podcast, I'm building out a companion website for the project as well. All the interviews that I've collected will be deposited into the Beaton Institute archive, which is through Cape Breton University. So like I mentioned earlier, that information is staying in the cultural community. That's where it belongs. It's their community. It needs to stay there. People need to be able to access it later. And then I'm going to work, after I get the podcast released, I'm going to do a companion documentary project, which is really just essentially a visual aspect of the podcast. So you can get some stuff like this in it.
I can't wait.
Yeah, me too.
So you've also, a part of your original idea for this project was to also interview individuals in the Appalachian region and asking them the same set of questions, musicians and tradition bearers here, to understand how contemporary technologies are impacting this cultural community. Can you tell us a little bit more about that continuation and your plans for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So originally, I really wanted this to be more of a comparison, but of course, being up there, this is really its own project, just looking at this cultural community. And I hope to just further this research and further this entire project. I can really see it growing. You can ask these questions. They're timely. Technology is, of course, always changing. We already covered that. Traditions are living traditions. They are going to change. How is technology speeding up that change? How is it playing an impact? How is it influencing? All these questions are going to change, or not change, but the answers to these questions are going to change based on whatever cultural community you're in. So I would love to continue it. That's my next plan, is to look for funding and continue the same project here in Appalachia. And since I've talked so much about bluegrass, I really would like to focus on that and see what is the same, what's different, what's overlapping. And then maybe even continue it elsewhere. I think that globally, like cultural communities are important, and I don't think I said this in the talk today, but the homogenization of like genre is an interesting area of exploration for me, and it's sort of like the coffee shop effect. That's what I'm calling it, where you can look at a coffee shop on Instagram and it looks the same in Australia as it does in England or in the United States. You can't tell the difference because that's what a coffee shop is supposed to look like. So one day, I think it's kind of a crazy claim to just say this because I don't believe it, but is everything going to sound the same? Are we going to be one global community eventually in a couple hundred years? Who knows? Who knows how our music will be represented? So that's why I'm so excited about this project happening in 2024, because it is documenting this moment in time of this is the stamp, this is right before AI. I asked questions about AI to my interviewees, and it was it's still too new to tell. We have no idea where it'll be in a year. Yeah. So I think it's timely, and I'm excited.
AI can change a lot. Who knows what's going to happen with all that? On that note, I think you've got one more video to sort of recap the talk for us and your time in Cape Breton, and then we'll open the floor to audience questions. So if you have any questions, please be thinking about them. When the video's over, if you will raise your hand, I'll come around with the microphone.
And this is just while Sam's gearing that up, that third video, I think it's titled 3 Recap. But I did a monthly newsletter for my time abroad. I know some people in here were on that newsletter, so thank you so much for reading that. It's just kind of a recap of my time there and the work I was doing and things that I was doing. And these I also created, because I'm a media person, I created a video recap for each month of being up there. So this is the very last one that's just sort of, there's no words, there's no narrative. So yeah, it's just sort of pretty pictures and song and dance in the background.
That looked like such a good trip.
That was the recap of the whole year on that one. So, and the whole Brook Village Dance Hall sang to me on my birthday, which is the ending clip there, and it was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. But yeah.
Well,
Sorry I talked so long. Oh my gosh. That's all right. You can leave if you're tired.
Does anyone in the audience have any questions for Toni? We've got a few minutes left for audience questions. Does anyone online have any questions, Sam? I think Renee said that she put one in the comments. She was texting me earlier and said that she put one in there. Oh, Mary's got one. I'll come around back. Oh, no, that's right. I need to get my exercise in today.
Well, having read The Wayfaring Stranger and talking about the carrying stream and the Scotch-Irish, and even the ballad going back to pre-written word and all the influences, I am just finishing a historic novel that's taking place in France on the Brittany coast. And they're talking about the Britons. I call them Britons until you corrected me. And the Celtic influence along the Brittany coast there. And I was so impressed, I thought, the carrying stream has so many tributaries. And now your references to the French and, of course, the Acadia, it just seems like such a wonderful sociogram.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really interesting when you look at square dance history, which I feel like I should know more about, but there's like French quadrilles that come from like square dance traditions, and that's how like that gets trickled down into the traditions here in square dance. And again, I'm not the expert on that topic, but I do know that there's a connection there between French. But we're all so connected, and that's just innovation when it comes to genre. I think your experience is shaped by the world around you when we're talking about genre. And so anytime, like, again, if you bring a flute into bluegrass, okay, that could be a whole new genre. Like, it's the people that have innovated that have created new things, and the people that are free, like, there's no police when it comes to like being creative. So whenever you're creative, that can lead to innovation, and that can lead to new things. And I think you could maybe make the claim, I don't know, maybe it's a bold claim, but you could say that about any genre, is that, it takes the innovators to make the new thing. So you could look at Bill Monroe, like he's the father of bluegrass music, but he didn't just exist. Like there were other influences that came in. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's interesting, like innovation and creativity and being free to do that. But yeah, it's all connected.
Any other questions from anyone in person? We've got two over here. I'll do you first, and then we'll come up to you, Jerry.
I don't know a lot about piano genres, but the piano music to me, just a few clips you had, sounded to me like what I grew up calling honky-tonk. And I didn't know, if you had studied that at all or had any information or insight.
Yeah. So that's I need to learn a little bit more about the background of the piano style, but from what I do know is that there was like a heavy jazz influence that came in, and so then you had a few players in that time period in like the 20s and 30s, and pianos are becoming accessible, and jazz is out there, and then that has like trickled its way into the tradition until it's fiddle, piano. And I know I don't have specific names, but there were individuals that people had mentioned during my time there that would sort of, it only takes one person to bring that in. And so the last clip there, the last song that we were hearing was Faded Love. Well, that's a song that we all know here. Like that's a waltz, right? So Faded Love is something that you will commonly hear at a square dance when they're playing waltzes and people are dancing to it. And I'm told that there's like one fiddler who is one of the people that I interviewed. I don't want to name names now just so I don't want to get anything wrong on record. But one fiddler, really had a country influence, and they just started playing the Faded Love and Tennessee Waltz, and now it's just like kind of been taken in the tradition. So it only takes one, and so I think that's probably what happened with the piano styles. And the piano styles are really interesting too, because there's so many, like I was saying, this is an improvised musical tradition too. So people are, like you saw one clip where the Mac is his name, was looking backwards at the guy playing fiddle, Kenneth, and he's kind of like checking, right? He's like, okay, maybe where are you going next? And he might have just been looking at, I don't know what he was looking at, but it felt like he was checking, okay, where's he going next? Maybe I can't hear, someone's talking to me. Okay, I need to listen to the fiddler. Because there's often times where people are getting together at actual public performances, they're community-based performances at halls, but it's like, oh, I've never played with this piano player before, and we're going to do this gig for 3 hours. Okay, we're going to play a dance together. I've never played with so-and-so. That's totally common, and it takes a really skilled accompanist to follow along, and maybe someone is jumping around and they're changing keys too much, and maybe that's really difficult for the piano player. Maybe they're used to you staying in A, and if you're jumping in A and you're going back to B and then you're going back to A, or A, E, and then the piano is like, oh, I've got to be on. I've got to know what's coming next. So the improvised tradition is interesting too in the development of the piano style. But there's a great book on Cape Breton piano by Chris McDonald, which I haven't finished reading, so I need to look into that. But we can maybe put some resources out there somewhere. I don't know, Erica. Where do we put resources?
The internet.
The internet. The internet can help you.
Here, Jerry, we'll let you go next. And I have been instructed by our tech guru to ask the audience to hold the microphone a little closer to your mouth so that our YouTube friends can hear us as well.
Okay. Toni, you've related the outside technologies possibly having an influence. Do you, people that you talk to, do they actually feel that, notice it, and how did they experience the new technologies influencing their culture?
Yeah, so I've gotten some conflicted, well, not conflicting. Some people said yes, that the way I listen to a rock band, I don't know, I listen to this influence, and I definitely feel like my outside influences are impacting the way I play piano. Like maybe I'm throwing more jazz chords in there. Maybe I heard something once and it's just kind of embedded in my brain, and this is an improvised tradition, so I'm just putting it in there, not changing it so much that it affects the authenticity of the tradition, not pushing it too far, or maybe being mindful about bringing those more contemporary influences in whenever you're playing for a crowd that's more general as versus a very educated local audience who is expecting a certain thing. Like I've heard people talk about rips on the piano, so you're like do do do, and then you go and you're like hitting all the keys, and it has this really dramatic, like big upbeat effect. Well, if you're, there were never rips on the piano up until a certain point, until someone started being maybe flashy and putting them in here now. So yeah, people have said yes, like the world around me, the music I listen to does impact how I interpret tradition, but maybe I'm choosing to be mindful about when I'm changing it a little bit. And then other people have said, I listen to everything, and I don't think that impacts how I play tradition at all. I think this is what it is, and that's how I play it, and I can do whatever I want outside of that. And I talked to a lot of people, formally as a recorded interview and just general conversation, but there are some great people in Cape Breton that play traditional music that are also really, really innovative and are experimenting with some really interesting styles, like my friend Bradley Murphy, who's a Gaelic singer. He was at one of the milling tables in some of these clips. So many people, but just to mention Bradley, I mean, he's taking these old Gaelic songs from the archives, and he's digging in, and he's learned Gaelic now. He has an ancestry there, a family history, and he's finding these songs, and he's like connecting to them, and he's singing them on these albums, but he's putting a lot of technology, like these funky sounds, and he'll take a oh my gosh, what's it called? Oh, I can't think of the word right now. It's like a sort of like a boom box that he's recorded he's like recorded piping sounds, and you've got that drone of the pipe that he's editing that audio to have this bigger, like more like sound that he's playing in the background while he's playing fiddle. So it's like, that's not traditional, but what is traditional? Like, who's in charge here, So, but I think the audience, that's the thing, is I think generally my takeaway is that people are free to do what they want. This seems to be the early finding. People are free to do what they want, but you got to be mindful and respectful of the tradition and who you're playing it for. There's a lot of artists out there who have taken the Cape Breton style into more contemporary directions and had a lot of success with it, like commercial success, and have brought people back into the tradition. So maybe they're going backwards, or they're finding something new, and then they find their way backwards to the root of the tradition. They learn about it. So I know I'm talking a lot.
You're right. I think we do have a question from our online audience, and then maybe time for one more in-person audience question, and then I think it's time to wrap up.
So our first online question comes from the curator, Renee. Oh, I forgot. Sorry, Renee. But she wants to know, so she knows that you participated in local folk traditions like weaving, and she'd like to know what drew her to that craft and how might you continue with it now that you're back here?
Yeah, that's a fun. I knew Renee wanted to ask about that, but that's another interesting connection between Appalachia and Cape Breton is weaving, and so I got involved in so many things up in Canada, but I was able to take a small introductory class in weaving, which is. It was really exciting, and I had a lot of fun with it, and I learned a lot, and then I took another class in it, and now I'm hoping to, well, I am going to continue the learning journey with someone who's in the audience here tonight, Deborah Prescott, who's an incredible weaver, and I'm looking right at her, and she's amazing, and she does, we have this really exciting time planned together to learn more from her, so, but yeah, the connection between weaving and Appalachia, I mean, this is a history, weaving is an ancient tradition. I'm so excited to just be on the cusp of learning about it in the last year, but it's an ancient tradition, and people have been weaving as long as there's been people. I mean, you're making things with your hands. I think it's important to get back to that meditative doing with purpose is exciting and interesting, and yeah, I'm really excited about that next journey. But there's traditions of weaving in Appalachia, certain patterns, certain colors. Of course, there's like Scottish tartans that people make, and those represent families, and that's a whole nother conversation about tartanism, which is like. Anyway, okay, I gotta focus. Everybody wants to go home.
Well, I did promise one more in-audience question if anyone has one. We've also got one more question online. If no one has one, I'll do that one instead. Anyone? All right. Well, then we'll give our online audience member the last question of the evening.
So David wants to know, how has the theremin affected Cape Breton music?
Oh my gosh, this is so exciting. Is that David Winship?
It's David Greenwell.
David Greenwell, what are you doing? You're listening. David Greenwell, hi.
You have a lot of shout-outs in the chat.
Oh my gosh, that's everyone from Cape Breton. I saw all the registration forms. This is like we're communicating digitally. This is great. Thanks for that question, David. So yeah, this is really exciting. This incorporating technology with tradition. Long story short, everyone wants to go home, but I play music as well. Unfortunately, I had a really terrible bout of tendinitis during the majority of my time that I was in Cape Breton, so I really couldn't play that much music. And I learned about the theremin, which is this electronic instrument that is so weird, and it's so amazing. And the woman that made the theremin popular had tendinitis, and she was a classical pianist, and I thought, I'm gonna learn this because she had tendinitis, and so do I, and this is great. And yeah, I'm still working on figuring out how to play fiddle tunes on the theremin. It's gonna be a long way off, but we want to get there. But I did bring a theremin to a ceilidh, which is just a gathering, a get-together with other music, and played it there. So that's something. I don't think it's changed Cape Breton yet. But there you go.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for tonight, Toni. This has been a great talk. I've got just a couple of things I want to say before everyone heads out the door. Just let you know about some of our upcoming events here at the Birthplace of Country Music Museum. Our next speaker session is going to be on Tuesday, March 11th at 7 p.m. with Dr. Lee Bidgood on the musical traditions and the global string band. On Saturday, February 22nd, we have our Bluegrass Jam, which is in partnership with the East Tennessee Bluegrass Association. On Thursday, February 27th, we have Farm and Fun Time at the Paramount featuring Sierra Hull and Mason Villa. And on Friday, March 7th, is our Museum Story Time. That's a children's program. If you've got young people in your life, they get to read a book and then do a craft and also sing a song with Mama Molasses, who also happens to be in the audience today. It's a great time. And then also on March 8th is the opening of our new special exhibit. This exhibit is called Ellen Elms, The Art of Music in Mountains. It's a wonderful art exhibit inspired by the music and traditions of our region. And then also on Saturday, March 8th, from 2 to 5 is our monthly Songwriters Circle. So if you are a songwriter at any level of your songwriting career, if you're interested in networking and learning more about that, you can come and join the circle. All right. And thank you all once again for coming out tonight. And if you enjoyed the session tonight, I'll just put one more reminder that there is a tip jar at the door. All of our programming here at the museum is either free or low cost. So if you want to contribute toward that, please consider making a donation, and have a wonderful evening. Stay warm, stay safe on your drive home.